have emotions and think about things. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome to Emotional and Mental Justice. Today I'm joined by Tumelo Moreri. Hello Tumelo, how are you?
Hi Yuna, I'm very well. You?
Good. Thank you so much for coming on. I am so glad. I mean, I've watched your stuff, some of the podcasts you've done and your Facebook page. I'm a member of that. So I just love what you do and what you talk about. So hence I was really wanting to get you here and speak to me about whatever we're going to speak about today.
Yay, it's an absolute pleasure and an honor to be joining you today. Thank you for the invite.
Thank you. So today's topic is based on intimacy, sex and communication in relationships. But before we go any further, I have a write-up here that I'm going to read because I need to do you an introduction. We can't go without letting people know exactly who you are and exactly what you do, because yeah, you do so much. So I'll read it so I get nothing missed. So Tumelo Moreri is a medicine woman and coach engaged in a body of work on womb medicine for African women leaders seeking deeper intimacy and pleasure in their bodies. She is the owner of Tumelo Moreri International. Tumelo Moreri International, she curates and offers coaching programs for the inner healing and transformation of women leaders. She's also host of the Tumelo Moreri podcast, where she podcasts about intimacy and pleasure. Tumelo is an avid student of leadership and spirituality, and her work and calling on womb medicine is for women seeking inner healing for their experiences of and around their wombs, to access their inner womb medicine and open up pathways for deep pleasure in their bodies. This work encompasses deep journeying on the inner and natural cycles of women, work on sex, sexuality and pleasure, and on deep intimacy. Tumelo is a 2018 fellow of the Zanele Mbeki Fellowship, whose mandate is to cultivate African feminist leadership, a 2017 Global Shaper of the Global Shapers Community, which is an initiative of the World Economic Forum, and a 2014 alumnus of the Mandela Rhodes Scholarship Program, whose mandate is to build exceptional leaders in Africa. She holds degrees in actuarial science with distinction and mathematical statistics from the University and of the Free State in South Africa. That is a lot that you do, a lot that you've done, and it's commendable. I mean, a lot of people may not understand what womb work is, you know. Can you just, let me know a little bit?
Okay. Thank you so much for the introduction, Yuna.
You're welcome. It's amazing.
Okay. So shall we dive into it now?
Yeah. Okay.
Or in a bit?
Okay, so I do have some questions for you, just because obviously anyone that knows me will know that this type of topic is not one I generally would come up with in a public eye. You know, talk of sex and intimacy. I'm not shy of it, but you know, it's not a top topic of discussion for me. That's why I'm excited to learn from you, to hear what you have to bring, and also for other women to just learn. So what does sex and intimacy mean in terms of, you know, in a relationship?
Sex and intimacy. I suppose like different people would have like different meanings, or sex and intimacy would likely mean different things to different people, right? But we could see the yearning for connection or connection, intimacy as being some of the common things that draw us to other people. Like we seek connection, we seek intimacy, we seek to be closer to other human beings. It tends to bring meaning into our lives, right? And when we look at sex, right, it's usually the practice that brings two people closer. yeah, I'm sure like the listeners would, if they reflected on the experiences of sexual encounters, they're usually seeking closeness, seeking to become one with this other person. Um, and it's sex really also serves as a portal for pleasure, right? And this is something that I personally have been exploring quite deeply, like why we come to sex, why we want to have sex, right? What is the intention? So one of those intentions could just be like for pleasure, to be in a pleasurable experience, in a pleasurable space with your partner, right? Yeah, I think that definitely, as many ways of looking at it and interpreting it, as there are people in the world,
Yeah. So I mean, sex and intimacy, from what you're saying, is two different things, but obviously they intertwine.
Of course, definitely, because as we were chatting earlier before we stepped into this part of the conversation, right? We're exploring how intimacy is not only limited to romantic relationships, right? Intimacy is like it's a sense of closeness, a sense of being close to, being connected to, and we can experience that with family, we can experience that with our parents, we can experience that with friends, we can experience that with our clients, right? And so like this is also the education around intimacy, for us to broaden our scope of what intimacy is, right?
Yeah.
Such that when we are yearning for intimacy, we're aware that romantic relationships are not really the only space where we can fill our cup of intimacy, right? And sex would then be another layer, right? Within our interactions.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So intimacy obviously would heighten the sexual experience, in terms of if you have a good intimate relationship, you have connections there emotionally, mentally, and things like that, and then I guess that makes the sex better.
Yes, definitely. So another thing I was thinking about while preparing for this conversation, I was thinking about just how diverse sexuality is, right? So like sexuality is as diverse as there are people in the world, right?
Yeah.
So one's preference of how they choose to exercise and tap into their sexuality won't necessarily be like how one prefers it, right? And so part of the education, or part of what we want to become aware of as individuals, is what our preferences are, right? What is it that would activate high levels of pleasure for you, right? Is it possibly sex within a safe relationship where you can be yourself, where you can express all that you want to express? That's part of the conversation actually that we'll want to get into around relationships and communication and intimacy and sex, right? What is it that people prefer? What is it that activates high levels of pleasure and ecstasy for them, right? There's so much to say.
It's such a wide topic, isn't it? I mean, obviously, when you
It
talk
is.
about the what you said comes into communication, doesn't it? So communicating sex in a relationship, or communicating intimacy. How important is it that we communicate this? Because one thing I was thinking is that sometimes people would rather suffer in silence. I say suffer, maybe it's not a suffer for some, but some people would rather sit in silence than tell the partner what they actually prefer, or tell the partner, listen, this is not working for me, let me teach you.
Wow.
Yeah.
So two things came up for me as you were saying that, right? So one, I would want to go back to the fact that our sexuality is diverse, right? So the ways in which I want to express and experience my sexuality will likely not be the ways in which you prefer or would like to express an experience, right?
Yeah.
And so this makes communication such a pivotal part of us enjoying our sexuality, right? Because what is pleasurable to me will not necessarily be pleasurable to you, right?
Yeah.
Like that is just like almost like just at the basics, like just to keep start this conversation, we need to start there. And we also need to acknowledge that like in the space of heterosexual relationships, right, the sexuality of men is quite different from the sexuality of women, right? You will find that in the majority, what brings women pleasure or the ways in which women get to access pleasure is different from the ways in which men get to access pleasure, right? Or the quickness of it, like the accessibility, the readily accessibility of it, you know, it's quite different, right? So this makes communication so important, right? Because you can never know what's going on in somebody else's mind or somebody else's body or what they want. I'm sure you and I don't even like the same flavors of ice cream. So the only way for me to know what Yuna likes is for me to ask Yuna, what ice cream do you like? If I truly want to pleasure you, right? If I want to make you happy as somebody that I care about, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one. Like communication is key because we're different beings and we prefer different things. Even within a group of women, you will find that different women prefer different things, right?
Yeah.
So even in same gender relationships, not the same things are gonna bring us pleasure, you know. So communication is key.
Communication is key, but
second,
okay, sorry, no, go on, carry on.
Oh yeah, so I was about to say that second, we would want to explore what it is that makes communication so difficult, right? And at the initial, we would just want to look at the ways in which we have been socialized or conditioned around sex, sexuality, and pleasure, right?
Okay, so
At
when
the
I
very
just
beginning,
interrupted you, this is what I was going to ask.
yes.
You're actually answering the question I had. So that's good. Carry on. The way we're conditioned.
Yeah, I mean, yes. So like you started this conversation by sharing how this is not something that you would normally talk about. Yuna, right?
Yeah.
And so as you're talking, I got curious about why. Like, why is it that yeah. Maybe you could share if that's okay.
Tumelo, I'm asking questions. Okay. I guess it's very much where back to childhood. I guess we don't talk about these things. Sex and pleasure and intimacy are not things you would talk about in your household with your mother or your siblings and all that. And are we conditioned to just? It's a bit of a taboo topic, isn't it? So there's shame and embarrassment and everything that goes behind, or that goes with discussing sex or openly even saying the word sex in the house. It's like, oh, and not to say I had such a strict upbringing, no, but I think naturally, I can't speak for every African culture, but I think as Africans, sometimes we don't always allow that to be an open discussion in families with our parents. And this is something, I guess, I have a daughter, and it's something I would prefer, I want to be more open with her when it comes to exploring, experiencing, and talking about. So those are my whys.
Yeah, and I would like to believe that a lot of women and men as well chose whys, right? So for a lot of people, sex is not something that was spoken about in our households while we were growing up, right? There was this implicit message that you are not supposed to talk about this, right? I would like to believe that for a lot of us, nobody explicitly came out and said to me, you are not allowed to talk about this. No, it's something
It's
that
just
we learn
known.
quite implicitly. Yeah, you
Yeah.
just know, like, this is not something you talk about.
But I also think it's
And
from the subtle things. Sorry to interrupt you again. I think it's also from the subtle things
yes,
like, oh, don't talk about boys. School is more important. Don't talk about, and boys come hand in hand
yes.
with, sex
Oh
and all these
gosh.
implications. So yeah,
Oh
they.
my word. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's I'm saying oh my word because like it's so multi-layered, right? For
Mm-hmm.
example, if you were to look at say if we're looking at the intimacy and the pleasure that purpose-driven women get to enjoy,
Mm-hmm.
and if we're to look at what keeps them from enjoying the intimacy that they desire, it's these messages that say no, if you're to be a straight A student, you have to stay away from boys. If you are to go study the course of your dreams and make it big in life, you stay away from sex. It's a bad thing for girls who want to do great things with their lives, right?
Yeah.
So it's like this whole socialization and conditioning around sex, right? The first at the initial just being this is something you don't talk about. This is something to be hidden, right? And so we internalize that very deep in our psyches, right?
Mm-hmm.
It becomes part of who we are essentially. And by the time we step into intimate relationships, we have deeply internalized this belief
Yeah.
that sex is not something you talk about. So how are you going to be able to talk about it with your partner, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, to be honest, as a young girl, not myself per se, but as young girls, it's important to have relationships with people of all sexes. Relationships with boys can be a healthy thing, just to get to know, because we're men and women, whilst we're the same in ways, we're also different beings. So just having
Mm,
healthy relationships with any type of person, I think is important, not
mm,
to keep children away from.
mm.
Yeah.
Oh, it's very important. So what I usually notice about our socialization is that like we would rather tell children to stay away from something as opposed to telling them the whole truth about the thing, right? So we would say don't have sex, stay away from sex, when what we could be doing is sitting down for a holistic conversation around sex, right? And we would find that the latter actually would have a greater positive impact. Like a child who's provided with as much information and who feels empowered around their sexuality will most likely make decisions that impact them positively, right? As
It's
opposed
informed
to
decisions. Sorry, I was saying it's
exactly.
informed decisions because, like you said, rather than saying, "Oh, let's not talk about sex," it's the why, or let's not have sex. It's the why not. It's the STTs that might come with it. It's the pregnancies. It's the what it brings.
Mm,
So those things are important. So when a
mm,
child or when they become an adult, whatever, makes decisions, like you said, they make informed
mm.
decisions. So yeah, I
Definitely,
definitely agree with
definitely.
you.
Yeah. A
Huh?
holistic conversation about sexuality is definitely more empowering than an instruction not to, or
Listen.
an instruction to stay away from sex.
your kids will learn anyway. They'll learn from their friends, but they'll learn the wrong thing because each
Mm,
and every one of those in their circle either knows the wrong thing or
mm,
they're going to tell each other lies
mm.
through it. No, thank you for that.
Also, yeah, also it like it takes away, like wouldn't we want to have a level of, because we can't have like absolute control, but wouldn't we want to inform what our children learn, right? So when we leave it up to their friends and their neighbors and whoever, we don't have any control over the information that they get a hold of, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
they will definitely learn stuff. I mean, they're on social media, they're watching TV behind our backs, right? So I feel like the best thing that we could do is
Mm.
bring them to a holistic conversation such that even when they get exposed to whatever it is that they get exposed to, they have already had this conversation at home.
Yeah, and just to be open
Mm.
enough to come and have those conversations, just to be able to say,
Yes.
you may not have taught me, but I'm confident enough that you won't say no, no, no when I come to you. um
Mm.
and that's healthy
Yeah.
for me. Well, okay, so just on to the next thing when we talk about actually, thank you so much for the children thing, because because before we discussed this, I think I was saying to you there's something I want to bring in about talking to children, but I wasn't sure what topic exactly we would go with. So we've covered that, and that's exactly what I was hoping to get there, so just talking about communicating relationships, it can be daunting to communicate sex in a relationship for many reasons. I've got here, like, for example, when it comes to things like, not just that you're a shy person or whatever, but things like sexual dysfunction, um, erectile dysfunction, low libido, body image issues, premature ejaculation, low confidence, fear of performance, lack of response to sexual stimulus, and all these things scream embarrassment. And I'm not saying people should be embarrassed about it, but I think it's human nature that we get embarrassed when we either can't perform or we haven't had it in a long time, so we don't know if we're going to be able to please this person. So it's all the embarrassing things that come with it, especially when it comes to the medical side of things. What advice would you give to anyone, or what's coming up for you when I'm saying this?
Gosh, quite a lot, because like every sentence you say, I'm like, oh my word. Okay, so just touching on briefly on the conversation with our kids about sex, we'll just need to come back to it, how we can cultivate that within ourselves to be able to speak to our children about sexuality, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and with regards to the question that you just asked, right? Like I said, there was quite a lot coming up, right? And maybe let me start with just intimacy, right? The types or the forms of relationships that we allow ourselves to get into, right? And this is even before sex or any sexual encounters, right? And so what has been coming up as I've been doing this work is the lack of education or intimacy in our society, right? A lot of us learn intimacy by trial and error. Quite similar to sex, there isn't much conversation in our households about intimacy, right? Like it's something you figure out, like you become a teenager and then you realize, oh, I like boys or I like girls and I want to kiss them, whatever, right? But there's hardly ever any conversation. And I guess this is why there would be people like myself who do this work, right? Because even when you consider our parents, they too never got to be taught about intimacy. Like it's something that just happened to them, right? Such that we rarely ever meditate or reflect on what intimacy means to us, on what the most nourishing and the most fulfilling intimacy would look like for us, right? Such that in so many instances, we might find ourselves in intimate relationships that don't feel safe for us, emotionally safe, right? Safety in the sense of just us being able to be ourselves, feeling like we can be accepted for who we are, right? Like that's just at the basic, right? And this is something that I see quite a lot, right? Where we're just in relationships that we actually shouldn't be in, relationships that possibly don't mirror or reflect our values, right? And we possibly haven't even reflected on what our values are, right? And in instances where the relationship might actually be a safe space for us, right? It might still be quite difficult to talk about our sexuality, right? I got that red light when you're talking about sexual, I think you called it like performance, performance anxiety and that, right? So, and then you also talk, and then you also mentioned something about the media, right? And like what's so interesting is that when you look at the different, like, shall I call it like the different segments of our society where we get taught about sexuality, there's so many contradicting messages, right? Like the medical institution would say one thing, the media institution would say another thing, school will say another thing, family will say something else, and they always tend to contradict themselves. The media, for example, it teaches women that they need to be like sluts in bed, for example, like you should be in a position to try all of these extravagant positions, right? And then when you go into the church, it teaches you something else. When you go into the medical field, it tells you something else, right? So what I find is that we're constantly dancing with these contradictions. Something says another and the other one says another. And there is usually the message around what is expected, right? Hence people would have performance anxiety because there is an idea of how apparently this is how sex or sexuality is supposed to look like. There is that. It's like, yeah.
And it's confusing. And it's confusing because, like you say, you're told all different things, and it's so important to know what your values are and what's important to you. But then how do you gain that when you're getting all this from everywhere? And again, we may go back to your upbringing. I don't know.
Yeah, it goes deep into your upbringing, right? And we can look at it like at 5 layers. There is some conditioning that happens when you're a baby. There's some conditioning that happens when you're a child, like for your inner child, right? There's quite a lot of conditioning that happened there.
Yeah.
Some conditioning that happened when you were a teenager, when you were an adult, right? Such that when we want to like almost like return you to your natural rhythm, we need to attend to this conditioning that happened at the different stages of your life, right?
And that's so important.
Yeah. And that's what the healing work is for, right? Because it's not something we can just talk through, you know. Like we need to sit together and we go in, right?
Yeah, and the person needs to actually touch upon it, just much like we said before we started this. When I do work as a therapist, some of my work is informed by psychodynamic theory, and with that is very much about you know, how your childhood experiences affect who you are today and how they'll affect your future decisions. So that's, and the inner child work, I've done that as well, and it just seems very important. And you're so right when you say that you can't just talk about it. It's something you have to actually reach upon and be able to identify, not by somebody telling you, but by you realizing, oh my goodness, this is where I've come from, and this is where I could get to.
Yeah, I get goosebumps as you're talking. It's so true.
I've spoke to many women who have not many, but several women who, like I said earlier, would rather sit in silence than tell their partner what's going on, or they would rather do everything that their partner wants them to do, or that their partner likes, as opposed to pleasing themselves, simply because sometimes women think sex can keep a man. Let me just say on that one, if your man is a cheat, he's a cheat. He'll probably go out and run around anyway, right? And there's no sex in the world that's going to keep him home. And some people either just want, I don't know, are not satisfied for whatever reason, or maybe want fresh meat or whatever else. But for me, the thing that's detrimental to women's self-worth sometimes is when they think that sex is what is going to keep their partner, you know, at home. What's your take on that?
Like it's it's very loaded, very, very loaded crap that, I mean, the conditioning, right? That however feels true for a lot of people, right? And like conversations like these, where we get to look at some of our conditioning and to call it out for the bullshit that it is, right? but calling it out is not enough. Like calling it out alone will not heal the wounds of our conditioning, right? I call it crap because like it's ridiculous, right? Like, why would a woman be told that your sex is what's going to keep a man? Like, it keeps a lot of people in abusive relationships and abusive marriages, right?
Absolutely.
And
And it is a load of crap. And I feel like it's not so much somebody being told that, but there's something in society about how, you know, and I don't know why or where that comes from, but there is something very much, if you don't please your man, if you don't, you know, if you're not giving him the goods or the thing that he wants, he's likely to find it somewhere else. And so you've got to be constantly making sure that your partner is satisfied, whereas satisfaction comes in all forms, not just in sex. You know, it comes in togetherness,
yeah.
it comes in emotional and mental, psychological togetherness, everything. So it is a load of crap, but it's a shame that this is still a very big thing for a lot of women.
Like it still is a big thing, I'm sure, for even us here in the room who are having the conversation. Like, here's the thing with this conditioning, right? Like it seeps and then it goes to sit in the deepest corners of your psyche that you wouldn't even know that it's running the show, right? And and like, this is part of what we would uncover when we get to do the inner healing work around just your life in J, right? But like, going back to this idea, it's actually a belief, right, for a lot of women in our society, that it's actually like a socialization, a conditioning, a programming around sexual pleasure, right? And it goes even much deeper than this, right? And in some parts of our society, women are told that sexual pleasure is for the man, right? And these would be what we term like the politics of pleasure. If we were to unpack our politics of pleasure, we would specifically sexual pleasure, we would get to see how a lot of us have been taught that sexual pleasure is for the man, right? And this impacts how readily accessible an orgasm is for some women, even though there are many factors that inform whether or not we're able to orgasm, right? You mentioned something about having to provide the goods, right? When we look at some of the it's ceremonies for newly married women, right? If we're to go into some of what they're told, right, that you have to make sexual pleasure available for your man whenever he wants it, right?
And that's a huge thing.
It's a huge thing.
In my culture,
right?
It's a whole ceremony of it. It's a whole where the women come together to teach you sexual pleasures, to teach you how your man should be pleased. And I don't believe there's anything of that for the man. You know, how your woman should be pleased. I don't believe that happens.
Well, we wouldn't know until we ask them.
That's very true. And that's why I say I don't believe. I don't know. Yes, you're right. I need to ask.
And also, like, what we get to see when we begin to unpack this thing is that it's actually both women and men are being held captive, you know, in terms of matters of their pleasure, right?
Yeah.
We're socialized in isolation, almost like you could see it as girls being in one camp and boys being in another camp, and they get their respective education around sexuality, and then we expect them to function together without even talking about it, right? And going back to the ceremony for newly married women, sure, you might agree with me that the people who lead those ceremonies are older women.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's a handing down of programming, right? From one generation of women to the next, right?
And where does it change?
And where does it change? It changes when we begin to have conversations like these, when we begin to realize that sexuality is something that is alive. It lives, because a lot of us live our lives pretending that our sexuality doesn't exist. it's like I go to the mall and I pretend that I'm not a sexual being, right? Until maybe I'm in the bed with a man. But even then, I'm still denying it. Like there's a lot of denial around sexuality, right? So until like we realize that our sexuality is alive, and then we make a commitment to prioritize it. Prioritizing it means learning about it if we need to heal. And almost all of us across the world actually need to heal when it comes to sexuality. Because when you look at how we have been taught sexuality, it's in ways that have disempowered a lot of us, right?
Yeah.
Yes. And when we do this work, when we engage in conversations like these, and we sign up for healing programs, like for healing courses, right? We then ensure that we don't, like the sins of the mother don't become the sins of the daughter. Then me and you, Yuna, we will then not become the women who tell our daughters to provide sexual pleasure to the man whenever he wants it. We'll become women who
I
teach
definitely
our
won't be
girls
telling my daughter
about
that
pleasure.
lesson.
Yes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned just something when you were talking about the camps, the two different camps. You have the camp of the men, the camp of the women, and talk to different things and expect to coexist in a relationship going forward. So what would you say if you had a camp? So would you have a camp of men and women at once being taught these lessons?
There would be an opportunity for both men and women to sit in the same room, right? Because like in my head now, I'm visualizing physical spaces. But like, so there would definitely be an opportunity for both men and women to sit in the same room and to sit through the same education, right? With me seeing that, oh, this man now knows this, and him seeing that, oh, me as the woman, I now know this, right? But like there's education that we would still need to do in our individual spaces, right? Gosh, like the way I look at it, like here's the thing. Society is not something that is outside of us. It's not something like something that is happening, a far away authority, right? You and I are part of society, right? So when we say society, our society needs to do something better, we're actually talking about me and you.
About us, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
That's
and
so
the person
powerful
who's
that you say that.
listening.
That's so powerful. I just want to, just interject when you say that. It's so many times we put the onus on others. We put the onus on who's doing what to improve this and who's teaching this. And we have that responsibility. And for you to say that we are society, society is not everything around us. So I just wanted to say that's very powerful.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, even the world, like when you consider the world begins with you, right? So anything that we see in the world that is not going right or that is broken, there should be ideally there should be a thought or a personal invitation to see whether that thing is not broken within us to start off with, right? So if we see that the sexuality of our world is not the most healthy one, we should also come back to ourselves.
Wow.
And reflect on how we are doing, how our own relationship with our own sexuality is doing, right? And I really love, I've come across concepts of how the healing of the world begins with you. Like you actually get to heal the world by just healing you, right? You get to heal the sexuality of the world by healing your own sexuality. Like you can't go save other people when you yourself are saved, right?
Yeah.
And so the places that we need to attend to first are here at home. Even
Yeah,
I myself.
and at home is within
Yeah,
you. You know what, that what you said,
exactly.
it's just like resonated with me, that it's something that even I haven't been doing. It's easy for us to look out and say, oh, I'm not like that. But sometimes when you see a situation
Yes.
and you think you're not like that, deep down there could be elements of you that are like that. So just to be intentional about coming back to you, looking within, for me that's powerful, and that's something that I will definitely take away from this going forward. And it's also with the also with judgments and prejudices and all these things, we all have them inside us. So you know, the
We
work
do.
all starts there. So no, thank you for that. That was that is definitely something I'll take away.
Yay. I'm so happy to hear that, right?
Yeah.
So I was about to add that. So even I, as a teacher of this work, I'm also a student of this work. Like, it would almost be impossible to teach you anything I haven't moved through myself, right? So as we're talking about sexuality, I too had to move through, and still are, to some extent, moving through my own conditioning around sexuality, So yeah, really the invitation is to start with the self, to start within, and have it overflow to the people in our lives, right? And the people in our lives could be our children, right? So by interrogating our sexuality, by recognizing first and foremost that it exists, by admitting that it exists, by having conversations with ourselves about it, we place ourselves in a better position to have these conversations with our children.
Yeah.
Like, it would be very, very difficult to have conversations about sexuality with our kids when we're still in denial about the existence of our own sexuality.
Absolutely.
Like, it's like, yeah, we'd be asking quite a lot from ourselves. So like, what I usually invite people to do, when they ask around, how do I become more comfortable in talking to my kids, right? The invitation is for yourself to grow comfortable in your own sexuality, is for you to grow comfortable in having conversations with yourself about your sexuality, right? And then you find that you begin to grow comfortable talking to your partner about it. You begin to grow comfortable talking to your kids about it, because it's like you have diffused it first and foremost with yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And when you do that, you begin to diffuse it with other people.
Yeah, and you become liberated. And when you're talking, it just gives me a sense of like freedom, being free, to be free is the most important thing, I think, in this world. We're trapped in our thoughts, we're trapped in our minds, in our emotions, we're trapped in hiding from reality, and when you talk like that, it just tells me you're liberated, you're free, and only when you're free with yourself can you then become free with others, and enable them to be free with you as well.
Oh, I love that. Yes. And especially our kids, hey?
Yeah, absolutely. So is
Ma-
there anything else that you have? I know you said that you had some things you wanted to say, or you planned and prepped. Obviously I've asked you all the questions that I had to ask, and I'm so thankful that you've answered everything and you've actually given me more information on that. Is there anything else that you have, obviously, to share?
So as you might have seen, like, this conversation is huge. Like, it's so broad, right? Like, it's so multi-layered. So maybe if you allow, I could invite those who are listeners, or I could direct them to some free resources on my website where they
Absolutely,
could
please do. Please do. I mean, this is
yeah,
such a wide
where
one.
they could
I want those resources for myself as well. So please do. And obviously, I will be putting all your details at the end and where you can be found. But your teachings are so valuable. So yeah, please do.
Thank you so much for saying that. Okay, so like, it's like at at the minimum, right? This is what I usually explore with people around sexuality, right? At the minimum, like as a start, we just want to look at what you have been taught about sexuality, about sex, about pleasure, right? And also about your woman body. Because the ideas around how it's difficult to pleasure a woman, right? So we wanna just go look at those to see, oh, so this is what I believe, right? Um, and so I have written a number of workbooks, and they're sitting on my website, tumelomoreri.com. I'll share that link with you, right? So
Wonderful.
there are workbooks that will facilitate for you a process of just identifying what you've been taught about sex, sexuality, and pleasure and your body, right? Because there's so much power in just becoming aware of what you've been taught, of what you have deeply internalized, and also looking at the ways in which that conditioning, that programming influences how you currently show up for sexuality and pleasure in your body, right? So like in this teaching about sexuality, like that's where we would want to start, right? And I call it a start because there's an opportunity to go even much deeper, right? Like once we have the awareness, then we probably want to heal and rewire our conditioning. Yeah, so but that's where we would start.
Amazing.
So on my website, there's a tab, there's a free resources tab, right? Just go there and you'll get the resources.
Amazing. And I just want to reiterate, this is www.Tumelo Moreri. That's the name will be on the screen. TUMELOMORERI.com. And for her podcast, you can find her on www.tumelomoreri.podbean. That's podbean.com. So yeah, podcast on intimacy and pleasure. That's amazing. Check her out. Look at her resources. Use her. You're very empowering and liberating. So thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm so happy that we got here. And so yeah,
thank you.
Thank you so much.
For more videos from emotional and mental justice, don't forget to share, like, and subscribe. If you have any comments on today's episode, please leave a comment below.
And think about things. Let's talk about it.